As a journalist, I once interviewed a woman with mental illness. The interview took place in a workplace for people with mental illness. And after the interview, I was invited to a cup of coffee together with the people working there. We sat around a table talking about the media and how we covered mental illness. Suddenly, a woman said, "When the media brings stories on mental illness and crime or violence, I go around to my surroundings telling them that I'm not dangerous. Just because I have a diagnosis doesn't mean that I all of a sudden turn violent." In my work, I've met other people like her who in one way or another have been affected by the way we cover problems regarding them. Today's topic is inclusion and diversity in journalism. My name is Lotte Rosdahl and I'm specialized in inclusive journalism and communication. In this talk, I will focus on three things regarding the topic. First, I will talk about why we need a new awareness about all our choices, and not only when we, for instance, choose sources for our stories. Then I will talk about why we have to take a look at the very foundation of journalism, and why this is the first step in working more inclusively. Lastly, I will talk about how we for a long time have been taking subconscious choices, and how we now have the possibility to take conscious choices. I'm sure no journalist wants to stigmatize or exclude people, but we risk doing it without knowing it and without wanting it. And we do so because the very DNA in journalism almost goes hand in hand with the mechanism that strengthens prejudice and stereotypes. As this way of working lies on the backbone of most of us, it risks happening not only in the big and conflict-filled stories, but in all the small choices that we take every day. When we choose our story, when we choose our angle, our sources, pictures, and so on. I therefore, in 2012, developed the journalistic method, inclusive journalism. I had experienced how our work had affected people, and I also had noticed a lack of different groups in the media: women, ethnic minorities, people with handicap, people with different social backgrounds, and so on. The method therefore deals with who is in the media and how are they presented. I believe that this is something all journalists need to be aware of, no matter what kind of journalism you're working with. It's about how to avoid own blind spots, how to ensure diversity and representation, how to cover problems without stigmatizing entire groups, and how to ask questions that support understanding, and how to create inclusive environments people want to participate in. But where do we begin? The first step to work inclusive is to look at ourselves and to look at our own foundation. We need to rethink our understanding of journalists as objective, because like everyone else, we are also influenced by bias. And that means that before we look out on the world and start describing it and describing the people living there, we need to look at ourselves. As people, we divide each other in them and us. We do so without even thinking about it. This is what psychologists call out-groups and in-groups. We put people in our out-groups that we believe are different from ourselves. It can be that we think they have other values than us, or they look different from us, or live in another region, or something like that. At the same time, we put people in our in-group that we believe are like ourselves. The tendency is that we have a negative prejudice towards people in our out-groups, while at the same time, we look at people in our in-groups in a more positive light. This also means that it's more easy for us to see problems in our out-groups than in our in-groups. Which social group do you, for instance, think about when I say social problems, like alcoholism? You may, like me, think of the lower social group, even though this is a problem in the upper class as well as in the middle class. It's also difficult for us to see the diversity in the groups. These mechanisms are we also influenced by as journalists, and this may affect our work. The consequences can be that people can be misunderstood by us. They can be portrayed without nuances and as stereotypes. They can be underrepresented in the media, and they can be treated without sufficient seriousness. We also need to look at the very DNA in journalism. There are different aspects I could talk about, and I've chosen our news criteria. Because when working with news criteria as conflict and sensation, we also risk re-increasing stereotypes and prejudice. I would like to illustrate this with the model of conflict escalation. The model shows what happens when a conflict escalates. It's a model used to help people getting out of a conflict. I will not go into depth describing it now. I just want to mention the paradox is that this is a tool that helps people out of conflicts. And the point is you go down the stairs while we go the opposite way. This means that we go up the ladder, and by escalating conflicts, we make it more difficult for people to understand each other and understand those who are different from ourselves. This mindset and way of working influence many of our choices. Let me give you some examples. When we work with these criteria, we stand on the ladder when we choose stories, for instance. That means that we look out in the world searching for stories that contain conflict and sensation. And that means that some groups are more often represented in the media regarding problems and sometimes specific problems. This is, for instance, why every third story regarding mental illness is on crime and very hard crime. This is also why ethnic minorities primarily are used as sources in stories regarding crime or problems with integration. We also stand on the ladder when we choose words, for instance, for our headlines, and also when we choose participants for a debate. It's almost like the further apart, the better. And that means that very complex dilemmas are covered as black and white. And that again leads to misunderstandings. This way of working also have consequences, because as we have in-groups and out-groups, so does our audience. Often people get knowledge about their out-groups from the media, and when they see them often in stories on conflict and specific problems, that image may fit with the image they already have of these groups, and in that way these prejudices are strengthened. This also can affect the people that we are covering. It may lead to self-stigma, so that people get ashamed of who they are or their own situation. It also creates a hostile environment. It's almost designed for people that are extrovert or used to being in the media. So what do? We work at the bottom of the ladder. This is where the nuances are. This is where trust journalism is. We still need to cover problems, no matter who they regard, but we need to do it in another way. For a long time, we have taken many subconscious choices. Now we have the opportunity to take conscious choices. This year, I published a book on trust journalism. I will shortly mention one of the tools from the book, the Nuance Compass. The Nuance Compass is a journalistic tool that you can navigate by every time you produce a new project, when you write an article, produce a program, a podcast, and so on. Because even with an awareness of our own bias, they still risk influencing our work. The Nuance Compass, therefore, is a tool that goes through the different steps in an assignment and help you being conscious about your choices. It helps us find new sources, find new angles, create an inclusive language, and so on. It helps us stay on course so that we can create a more inclusive, diverse, and accurate picture of the world. Never before have there been more focus on inclusion and diversity in society. The method and the book is also an invitation to all of us to be aware that we have a choice every day, as individuals, as journalists and editors, and as media, and that our choices influence people's possibilities to create a good life. As well as the media is a part of the problem, I strongly believe that we are also part of the solution, as we can provide the nuances and the knowledge that can support understanding and trust between people. As this is a question about habits, we need time to train, but time is now. I will end this talk with some questions we can ask ourselves. Where am I on the staircase when I work? Do I call the same sources because it's the easiest thing to do? Do I consider which words I use regarding a person or a group? If you want to know more about inclusion and diversity in journalism, you can visit my homepage. Here you can find reports, videos, and articles on the topic. You can find tools and the book Trust Journalism. You can also find lectures, workshops, and training on inclusive journalism and communication. And you can subscribe to my newsletter on inclusion and diversity in journalism.